Welcome to another episode of the ImproPod podcast. My guest today is Donald Dunn, who's a podcaster and veteran. He runs a show called Veteran Voice Radio. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. I'm honored to be here.
So tell us a bit about your show.
My actual podcast, Spirits and Stories with Donald Dunn, it's a place for people to come on, tell their story, and allow us to document it. So future generations can hear where we came from, our time frame, talking a little bit about the 20-year war that we just went through. It's just another good way for me to continue with my therapy from PTSD and discussing some of my traumas that I went through. Veteran Voice Radio is a radio station that takes on from that and allows us to help veterans transition into music. I remember a lot of music being played in places that really sucked and how much it helped a lot of people.
So what is that kind of process of transforming into a musician?
So a lot of these guys, they're trying to find gigs and they're going through places like Spotify and stuff trying to get their music heard. And they're at a disadvantage because most of them, by the time they get out, they're in their 30s. And record labels are not exactly looking for a lot of people of that age. And then they get buried in the algorithms because it takes money to market your brand and everything else. And most artists are not into the marketing scene. And as I've learned, they do a very poor job of marketing their brand. So that's where we take over. Our radio station only plays music from veterans and their dependents. So their wife or husband and kids can also be an artist on our shows. We take care of a lot of the marketing. We highlight them on our websites. Every song we gets played, I link them back to their direct Spotify accounts and stuff like that. And then we work with a lot of great organizations to help them get paying gigs, or if they're just doing it for therapy and they're not trying to perform, we can help get them involved with Zach Brown's Camp Southern Ground for Hero Week, with a lot of writer conventions and therapy-based programs as well.
And so do you think improvised music plays a part in the kind of healing process?
Yeah, a lot of songs get started from that. They come across something that happened in their life that was an event, and it springs an idea, and the songwriting process starts from there. A lot of these guys don't necessarily sit there and just try to think up songs. A lot of them, they pull from their life experiences, and without those experiences, that moment of sitting down and jotting down notes from what you're thinking or dreaming or anything like that wouldn't happen.
So I'm going to play you a piece of music. I'd like you to tell me what it makes you think of. So that's anything that comes into mind, any kind of thoughts, stories, emotions, ideas. And it's completely improvised. I haven't thought about it, just made it up on the spot. So what did you think of that?
I don't know why, but what comes to my mind is a scene in a movie. Two people are falling in love and are planning on running away to get married. The families don't align and they just are planning to escape the world and get married and start their life. I don't know why that came to me, but just the flow of the music, I guess, is what kind of put me into that thought process.
Is there any particular movie that comes to mind, or is it just the sort of genre?
Yeah, it'd just be the genre. I can't think of any movie off the top of my head that has something like that.
There's a girl and a boy, and they meet, and they fall in love, and then there's some family trouble, and they have to escape.
It's like the families from each of them don't get along with each other and do not approve of their marriage. So they run away and get married. And I think parts of that music bring in how the two families are arguing over this as they disappear. And it leaves the two families fighting with each other, blaming each other for their children getting married and taking off.
So I'd like you to tell me a story of some kind. Then I'll break the story down into sections and improvise a soundtrack to the story.
The story that comes to mind for me is being deployed to Iraq and Afghanistan and coming back from a long night's work or a long day's work. You would come up to your hooch and you would see soldiers sitting around with guitars and other instruments that they either made or brought. And everybody would be just unwinding, having a jam session with each other, trying to relax from the stresses of the day and using music to relate with some humor or some storytelling. Just brings everybody together. People that they don't even know just walk by and see them and stop and sit and talk, and they meet new people. And the day ends like that just about every night.
And is this around a fire?
Yep. Sometimes it's just people sitting on their stoop and playing, and everybody sitting in chairs or lawn chairs and just having a good time.
It's like whatever's happened that day, no matter how traumatic it is, everyone comes together and makes music.
Not being a musician myself, I always enjoyed sitting there and watching the camaraderie as soldiers come together.
So I'm going to take this idea of camaraderie and partnership, as you say, and try and explore that musically. How was that? Did that reflect the story?
Yeah, it really did, because a lot of the songs that get sang and the time spent there is usually mostly upbeat songs designed to cheer you up. And yeah, I think that worked out really well.
Thanks. There's a real consistent rhythm in that D major, and then you've got the G at the bottom. That G creates this real sussy sound, like suspended, kind of resolved to the A. When you play a guitar, like trying to replicate a sort of strumming rhythm with the guitar, because imagine they didn't really have a piano.
Yeah, most of the guys would bring guitars, acoustic type instruments. I seen a guy try using spoons. That was interesting. You'll see a lot of people using drums, boxes, and stuff like that to make drums out of.
What sort of music were you listening to, particularly pieces of music that really helped you lift your spirits if you'd had a really bad day?
For me, it was usually an upbeat rock song. I liked a lot of Nickelback and stuff like that. So sometimes I'd hear the guys do some covers from those kind of bands. That always made me happy because it brought back a piece of home.
And that's the sort of stuff you listened to when you were growing up?
Yeah, I listened to mostly rock. more upbeat type rock, not quite like death metal or something like that, but Metallica, Nickelback, Creed, that kind of genre. I still listen to that today.
So, would you like to tell another story?
While I was in the military, we received a new private who did not want to be in the military. From the time he got there, he was trying to get chaptered, kicked out of the military. We had to go to our company commander, and he was going to be interviewed. That was something that the commander was doing with all of his soldiers so he could get to know him. He was a new commander. And when he went in, he sat down. The commander did not know that this person was actively trying to get out of the military. And he asked him, he said, "What was the reason that you joined?" And this kid didn't hesitate. He looked at him and said, "Call of Duty, sir." And the commander took that as patriotism and honor, and he said, "I get it, your family probably served." And the kid had this look on his face. He was so puzzled, and he looked at me, and I looked at the commander. I said, "Sir, I believe he's talking about the video game Call of Duty." The commander just stopped. He looked at the commander and he goes, "Yes, sir, I thought it was like the video game Call of Duty, but it's not. Can you chapter me?"
You think he would have done like a bit more research on it?
Yeah, he was not the brightest bulb in the world.
It's a great story, but I'm not really sure how that's going to work musically. Could you tell me another story?
Okay. Coming out of high school, I've gotten married, decided to join the military myself. And that stemmed from losing my job and being young with only a high school degree. Me and my wife get married. The things that we are concerned with is being apart, similar to anybody else, and the stresses of military life. Neither one of us really knew much about it. So I get married, and a few months after that, I leave for training. The one thing that neither one of us wanted was for my first duty station to be a place apart. And after training, the first duty station I get was Korea, which put us apart for a year. And I had to move my wife out of the house we lived, and she moved in with her parents while I was gone. And then we spent the year apart, and then we were finally reunited again when I got stationed at Fort Bliss a year later. And that's when we had our first child.
You must have thought that this separation would be quite likely.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. We both knew that was something that was possible. At that time, there was no combat stuff going on, so the biggest fear was Korea, because everywhere else you pretty much could take your spouse to, whether it be Germany or somewhere else overseas. Korea was really about the only place that you could not take your family. And I got lucky enough to have that to be my first place.
What were you doing in Korea?
So I was a mechanic. That's what I did in the military. I was a diesel mechanic. So I worked for a forward support battalion, and I was up there supporting the infantry where the DMZ is. So vehicles would break, they'd bring them down to us, I'd fix them, and they'd take them back up to the front of the line after they would get repaired.
And so you never made it to the north?
Yeah, I went up there on tours. You see the psychology side of war, about the intimidation, and both sides would have troops walking the lines, and for whatever reason, one country would build a bigger flag, and you'd see their flag waving, and then South Korea would build a bigger flag, and these flags have gotten just massive, like the size of football fields, and they're on these giant poles waving. It's always a competition of who can show out and have the bigger flag and everything else, but you feel the tension that's in the air. One person makes the wrong step and steps over that line, and a whole war could spring from that.
So musically then, there's a sense of distance. You're in Korea and you're not sure what might happen, kind of anticipation. And then the reunion, which I imagine was a pretty amazing experience.
It comes with a lot of emotions, because you and your wife are excited to be back together. But at that time, early in my deployments, I had very young children. My son was very young. My daughter was just born. So that constant in and out of their life, I would leave, and then by the time I'd come back, they would not know who I was anymore, and they'd be scared of me. And it would take a while to get that relationship built back up again.
Wow, that's quite something, yeah. So musically then, there's this sense of distance, this anticipation that something might happen in Korea in terms of the conflict, and then this sense of the reunion. So what did you think of that?
Really good. Yeah, it really does resemble that whole all the way up to the climax of getting back together. And then there's a section in there that kind of shows that there's still some separation, even though we're back together, trying to reunite the family and figure out who's in charge of the house and whose rules we're going by, because that was always a part that me and my wife would butt heads on, because she had to be the person that disciplined the children without me for such a long period. And then me to walk back in, I had to learn my role to not walk in and just start letting the kids do things because I would miss them and wanted to see them happy. Yeah, that I could relate to that quite a bit.
So with the music then, I was exploring this idea of home and playing this E major chord, but with a C, which is the sharpened fifth, which kind of introduces this uncertainty because you're back home, but you've got to get used to this new way of life and there's still quite a lot of work to do.
Yeah, absolutely. That's exactly how our relationship would go. And by the time we would start getting that figured out, that cycle would happen all over again. I would be off to another deployment and he'd come back, and it got easier the more that it happened because we started learning how to figure it out. And I would learn that the best phrase isn't so much just saying yes when the kids ask me something. It would be, what did your mom say? And that way I could double check and make sure that they weren't just playing mommy and daddy. And mom said no, so I'll go to dad. It got easier because the kids got older and they understood that who I was when I came back. They remembered me, and I didn't have that pain of holding my children and they start crying because they're scared of me.
Wow. Yeah, that's quite something. So did you miss the world of the military and the discipline when you came home?
Yeah, I think that's the biggest thing that happened when I got out of the military. One of the reasons why I had such a hard time was leaving the military, coming in at 19 and getting out at 39. Everything that I know on how it works in the world was based off of how the militaries ran. And nobody prepares you for the fact that when you're on a military base, it's literally like you're in a different world. The rules and the way things are done and the way you act, all of that stuff is different than when you're a civilian and you have to worry about the stressors of the economy and how things are going, because you don't have that luxury of everything being controlled in that controlled environment that you're in the military. So when I got out, I lost my whole identity. I was no longer a leader of soldiers. I didn't get the ability to train people to protect this world anymore, and I didn't have anybody looking up to me. So when I got out, I struggled to find a job. So out of necessity, I created a business and I started a trucking company and provided myself with a job, which caused more problems because I was suffering from PTSD and didn't know it. I was already thinking suicide, and I put myself in a truck for 6 weeks at a time, and then I'd be home for a week. And when you're isolated and driving by yourself, you have nothing but time to think and get in your head.
And how did you sort of get out of that?
It came to a boiling point. Our area got hit with a hurricane, and the day after the hurricane, me and my son got into a very heated argument, and it almost turned physical. My wife had to get in between us, and I kicked him out of the house. And that's when I realized that I was no longer the guy that I used to be, and that I needed some help.
What kind of help did you get?
I reached out to one of my soldiers that was seeing a psychologist, and I set up an appointment with him. I did it separate from the VA and from the military. I did it on a private sector. Luckily, that psychologist he primarily focused on PTSD and trauma, and he had also gone through a lot of the military training just so that he could get an idea of the stresses that his patients have. So he went to the Navy SEALs and went through their training and worked with a lot of the special operations units. And being in special operations myself, it worked out really good. He could relate to my deployments and the things that I went through.
Wow, it's quite unusual. Imagine there's a lot of commitment for him to go through.
He's also the one that put the PTSD program together for the base there. I didn't know any of that stuff until I started seeing him. But yeah, he wrote a book. He's very requested to speak at conventions just because of his research on PTSD.
So what did you get out of this podcast?
I have been to the point where I relate music to therapy. And I never thought about how your day-to-day life and your story can be still referenced by music that doesn't even have words. And I think that's something that I need to figure out a way to incorporate with our nonprofit, because we focus on the words so much, but the true feeling comes from the music itself, not necessarily just the words.
And so how do you think you could use instrumental or improvised music?
I think this would be a good project, exactly what we just did during one of our songwriting conventions, and have them, instead of starting out with lyrics, start out with music and do a little bit of this improv type scenarios with somebody telling a story, somebody else playing the music to their story, and showing how one person feels a way and how their story turned into music. So how they related to that person's story with the improv music that they came up with. And I think that would go deeper with the therapy part of our system.
So what was the name of your podcast?
It's Spirits and Stories with Donald Dunn. You can find it anywhere that you get your podcasts. If you go to my website, you can find our YouTube channel and our social medias and all that stuff. It's just donalddunn.me. From there, you can find links to our nonprofit, Veteran Voice Radio.
So you interviewed Pete Turner, who's ex-spy on your podcast, who I recently interviewed on this podcast. He's an interesting guy.
Yeah, he truly is. He's got a lot of great stories. He's done a lot of things in his life.
Thank you very much. It's been very insightful.
Thank you. I enjoy it. I hope all of y'all take care and keep doing what you're doing. I really like it.
Nice one. Join us again for another episode of ImproPod. Thanks for listening.